it'll be all about college basketball, and that's what we'll transition over to right now, as we've got a lot of stuff to get to here on the hardwood. I guess the best place to start here is just to dive right in with the notes that we want to talk about for today's show, starting with our fade and follow candidates.
Yeah, I'm going to start with Baylor as a fade team, and I'll say that I think Baylor is a good team. They've proven that at this point. This is not a Baylor team that I'm anxious to go against, but at the same time, how could the market be much higher on them than it is right now? I think perception of them is so high that this is one of those cases where we talk about how this can be like a stock market where you have to sell high. I think that's what this is right now. Is Baylor's just done so well and is being talked about so much now that this is a very good team, but they're being priced as, even better than what they are. So I'm going to fade Baylor here in the short term based on just trying to sell high.
Well, and I think, too, when I did preview this game over at BangTheBook.com, and we had somebody in our Twitter mentions who was like, look, the number one team in the country should never be an underdog. And they wound up working out that way in that game against Florida on the road. Baylor wins by 11 in that one. But all that's going to do to me is drive up that narrative, is drive up that price tag of, look, they were an underdog in a game that they were, people are going to say they were supposed to lose. And they went on the road, won by 11, had 1.188 points per possession against a Florida team that was supposed to be very good defensively this year. All that does is continue to inflate this Baylor team. Now that they get back into Big 12 play here, they're going to have some tough road games and some difficult environments. I agree with you. I think this is a sell team from an ATS standpoint. I don't know if they lose some games straight up here coming up, but from an ATS standpoint, their stock is going to be really high, particularly with people not trusting them against Florida and then coming away with that big win.
Yeah, and I think that you could argue that win over Florida says a little bit more about Florida than it does about Baylor. Florida is a team that really should be better than they are. I'm a bit confused about that team. They should be much better than they are. They're certainly disappointment to me. Florida team that has so much talent that is 12-7 this year, and for quite a while, I thought Mike White was a really good coach. And at this point, I think he's a decent coach, but certainly not as good as what I thought he was in the past. And Baylor, from that standpoint, Baylor is going to be laying some decent numbers here coming up. These are games where Baylor's not going to be, laying 1 or 2 points when they go and play at Iowa State, when they go to Kansas State, when they play at home against TCU, when they play at home against Oklahoma State. They've got a lot of games coming up here where they're going to be decent sized favorites. The thing about the Big 12 is, there's nobody in the Big 12 that's really bad. They don't have any easy teams to beat up on. And I think that schedule can wear on you quite a bit. And we've seen so far this year that, those top teams don't usually stay at the very top for too long because they get upset by somebody.
Well, again, I mean, when you've got that number one or you've got that high ranking or something like that, you have a bullseye on your back in every single game you play. You're going to get a team's best effort night in and night out. And there's going to come a point where you don't have a best effort to give. And especially when you talk about, kind of that grueling schedule in the Big 12. So I agree. I think Baylor is definitely a bit of a fade team here from an ATS standpoint. Let's go way under the radar here for a follow team. And I really like this one.
Yeah, this one's just a little bit more under the radar than Baylor is. Hampton, the Pirates, in the Big South Conference. They used to be in the MEAC there a couple of years ago. Hampton is not, I'm not saying they're a good team, but they're better than most people think they are at this point. Jermaine Merrow missed quite a few games this year. Merrow is one of the best scorers in the country, certainly a volume shooter. He takes 37% of their shots. He's a good player in general, 6 foot, 180 pound senior. This is a guy who makes this team a totally different team. And since he's come back, you see that, number one, they've been a lot more competitive. And number two, they've had some really high scoring games. So they don't play much defense. I don't think that's going to change. They're going to play very quickly. They have a lot better ability to score. They almost knocked off Radford on the road the other day, which was certainly a very good performance against a Radford team that is one of the top 2 or 3 teams in this conference, certainly top 2. I think Hampton is one of those teams that goes way under the radar, and I think that you could make some money backing them here the rest of the way.
I like it. I like that one a lot. Have you noticed their totals numbers adjust, with Merrow back and being more of a contributor?
I don't think they've adjusted enough. I think that I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't take the over against Radford the other day. I did back the over here a couple times with Hampton and have won both of those. But I think that the odds makers are slower to react to a team like Hampton in the totals market than they are a bigger name team. So I think that they have adjusted some, but not enough.
All right, so let's look at some regression candidates here, and we'll start on the negative side because, again, you always like to end on a positive note whenever you can. So we'll start on the negative side with regression here, and this is not under the radar. This is not a Hampton-esque team. This is a team out in the Pac-12.
Yeah, Pac-12, Oregon State. Oregon State, to me, I remember talking about them once earlier this year and saying, I don't know that they have enough scoring options, and that is definitely proving to be true. Trey Stinkle, a very good player. Ethan Thompson, a good player. They have some other decent options, but after those first two, I don't think anybody here is really consistent enough. And they were 104th in effective field goal percentage offense last year, 56th so far this year. And in the last couple games, they have been really bad, really bad. I'm not very optimistic about this Oregon State offense as you move forward because, if they can't score on UCLA and USC, there are some decent defenses in the Pac-12. I think the Pac-12 is certainly better than what they have been in recent years. I still don't think they're a great conference by any means, but they play Stanford in their next game. Stanford's a good defensive team. Oregon's a pretty good defensive team. Obviously, Washington, who they already played and struggled against. But Colorado's another pretty good defensive team. So you've got some teams in the Pac-12 that I think will give them trouble. Oregon State's a team that I wouldn't be anxious to back. And obviously they've lost 4 games in a row, so the market's not going to be terribly high on them. But maybe we find some value with unders on them as well, because if you look at their tempo, they've slowed it down by about a second and a half per possession on offense in the Pac-12 versus in non-conference play. So totals may be a little bit inflated here going forward.
Speaking of the Pac-12, I'm going to pat myself on the back for a second here. It's not exactly the way I expected the game to go by any means. But Cal, with that home win over Stanford yesterday, they get Oregon at home on Thursday. Oregon State, team we just talked about here on Saturday. Cal is a team I mentioned on last week's show, enormous home road splits. Now, offensively, they were not good at all in that game against Stanford. They were better than Stanford was to win by a couple points. But Cal at home is a much different team than Cal on the road. So I don't know if you want to go back to the well here on Thursday, but maybe Saturday against Oregon State. A good spot to take a look at there in Berkeley.
Yeah, and Cal did a good job taking care of the basketball there last night in that game against Stanford. 7 turnovers to Stanford's 15. That was really the big difference there. I agree with you. I think Cal is probably a good team to fade on the road, a good team to either back or possibly play an over at home. Although I will say, playing an over with this Cal team, the tempo they're playing at, you better get a really low number. So I don't know what to think of them against Oregon in that game on Thursday. Oregon's clearly just a far better team than them, but they'll probably be catching 10 points or something like that. So maybe you like that a little bit, but I think Cal is one of those teams that you look at the home road dichotomy, it's pretty extreme. And we've talked about this before, but Bart Torvik's site can be a really helpful resource, and it's very good when you look at home and road splits. You can even look at non-conference and conference and see how a team's played in the conference on the road or in the conference at home, because some of those non-conference road games don't mean near as much as once you start getting in the conference and playing those road games.
All right, so we finish on a high note here with the regression candidates, and that is Temple over in the AAC. What do you like about the Owls?
Well, I just think that Temple's offense has been so bad. It's hard to imagine them continuing to be this bad. They're averaging 0.881 points per possession in AAC play. They're shooting 44% from 2-point range on the year. It's hard to be that bad over the course of the season. The AAC has some good defenses. I wouldn't say they're loaded with great defenses. This team's playing very quickly. Temple is. And if they ever start making some shots, overs could have some value with this Temple team because they've played some very low scoring games that have been extremely fast paced. It's hard to play under 126 or under 127 with a team like Temple because that there's going to be 70 possessions or more in the game. So I wanted to point this one out in that I believe that Temple could be a decent team to back ATS. I also think that they could be a good team to play some overs with because I imagine that their offense will at least be somewhat better than they've been so far this year.
Well, and also, too, I mean, you look at this Temple team, a very good offensive performance against Cincinnati. They did lose the game last Wednesday, but they had 1.174 points per possession in that game. They've played Tulsa on the road. They played Houston at home. Really bad look against Tulane. That's one that kind of stands out. But they beat Wichita State at home. They won on the road or they lost on the road at SMU by 16. They're going to start playing some of the weaker teams in this conference a little bit. They get East Carolina twice. They're going to play UConn twice. They're going to get a revenge shot at Tulane. So they're going to get South Florida at home. That's another very winnable game for them. So I think that's part of it too, is that they've played some difficult conference games so far, and things will lighten up a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And even in the non-conference, they played some pretty good defenses. They played Maryland, USC. They beat USC on the road. They played Missouri, teams like that, Davidson. So Temple has played a pretty tough schedule so far this year. And I think, like you said, the AAC does have some weak teams that they should be able to take advantage of. I think that Temple could be a good team to play some low overs with here going forward.
There was one tempo change that you wanted to mention on today's show as well. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I think that these are things that you really want to look at if you're betting totals. I've been looking for teams like this here recently, and I found a few of them here. One that I wanted to point out, San Francisco, the Dons, they have slowed down dramatically. 4.4 possessions per game slower in conference play than they were in non-conference play. You can go to Bart Torvik's site and check out that pace chart. We talk about the graph where you can just see what the trend line looks like. The trend line is just straight down in San Francisco's games. Even in some of the games where they've played teams who play quickly here recently, their tempo has not been what you would have expected. So they are making the other team slow down, where earlier on in the season they were really speeding up. So we've seen the market already start to bet unders with San Francisco. So usually the opening line gets bet down by several points. So if you like San Francisco under, you probably want to play it early.
Yeah, those tempo changes are very important. And again, I mean, out in the West Coast Conference, you get some of those pace wars too. So definitely something worth keeping an eye on here as we go forward. We try to bring as many of those things to you as we can. And of course, after the Super Bowl here, we're only going to be talking about college basketball on these segments. So we'll be able to find some more of those tempo changes. And again, keep in mind too, injuries can have a big impact in terms of the tempo that a team plays at. If a big guy goes out, they may speed up. If a point guard goes out, they may slow down. If they don't have that facilitator for the offense, they not want to play a lot of possessions. So injuries will definitely dictate tempo as we go forward here too.
Yeah, definitely. We'll get to talk about more of the injury notes and recent tempo changes and things like that as we move forward. I think that things like that, especially in the under the radar games, are really a good way to make money betting college basketball.
All right, so we'll take a look at a bunch of games here for this week, sort of do them in a little bit of a rapid-fire fashion. Small card on Monday. I did preview Kansas and Oklahoma State over at BangTheBook.com for you to check out. It's such a small card on Monday that there's a MEAC game on ESPN and ESPNU, which, I mean, hey, it's good for Florida A&M and Norfolk State. I did write about that one in my situational article over at BangTheBook.com. But we flash ahead to Tuesday here. A couple of games. One that both of us agreed on, one that I kind of wanted to take a look at here. The one that both of us have in mind, Richmond and VCU. And for those that don't know, these two schools, both of them in the city of Richmond, they are very, very close together. Allegiances definitely split here. These two schools are 6 miles apart. So a big rivalry game here in the A-10.
Yeah, this is a massive game, and both of these teams are good teams. I think Richmond's been a team that has been a surprise to many people. Chris Mooney has been on the hot seat. I don't think he probably deserves to be on the hot seat, but he had a disappointing year last year. I think he is a good coach. I think Richmond has some good talent to work with. Grant Golden is a guy, if you haven't watched him play, he's a very skilled big man, 6'10", very good passer, good around the hoop. A guy who can run the offense for him. I will say that one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this game, and I was glad that you wanted to talk about this one as well, is Blake Francis out with an injury. Don't overlook that injury. He was very key to this team, this Richmond team. So I don't think they have nearly the upside that they did with him. He's a good long-range shooter, really good from the free throw line. They will miss him, certainly. And I think VCU on the other side, VCU has been a little bit undervalued here because they've not been good ATS. They're a team that I believe I mentioned on here as an undervalued team going forward. And I'm kicking myself for not playing them here a couple times in the recent weeks. They've been one of those leans that didn't quite make the card. But VCU is a good team that obviously is very reliant on forcing turnovers. If you look at Richmond, Richmond's very good at not turning the ball over, which makes this a very good matchup. And like you said, obviously, this is a very heated rivalry game. So this is not one where I'm sure that I have a strong opinion on what side I want to bet. I do think that this is a very interesting game. I would probably lean toward VCU with Richmond without Francis, but I don't know what this line's going to be. Is VCU going to be maybe -6.5, somewhere in that range would be my guess. The total, maybe you want to bet a total under in games like this normally, but at the same time, Richmond has been so efficient on offense this year. VCU, they're going to push the tempo. So I guess I don't really have a strong feel for what I want to bet in this one. What are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I think it's tough, especially with the rivalry factor, especially with, I would kind of want to look the Richmond route. The injury to Francis is a big concern. He's the second highest usage player behind Golden on the roster. So, maybe a little bit tough for them to score at times if he's out for any prolonged period. The thing that concerns me about this game for VCU is that Richmond just had a shot against Dayton and came up short. Now you really want to get this one. I mean, you always wanted to anyway with the rivalry factor, but you had a chance at knocking off a top 10, top 5 caliber team. You didn't get it. Now you come back even more motivated to go and get this one. You had your chance at home. Now you go, quote unquote, on the road for that little 6-mile trip. I think Richmond's very, very focused here. Obviously, I think VCU is as well. But with VCU and some of the issues that they've had offensively, I just kind of wonder if, they bring that same intensity on offense that they're going to have on defense.
Well, another point, if you like Richmond in this one, like I said, I don't really think I have any strong opinion here on this game. I think it's a great game, and we'll find out more about the two teams. But Richmond, I believe, was beaten by VCU in both games last year. Yeah, they were beaten 81-60 and then 69-66 last year. So Richmond has plenty to think about from last year, and Richmond's clearly a much better team than they were a year ago. So I think this will be a fairly close game. I wouldn't want to lay a lot of points with VCU. So we'll see what the number comes out at and where the money goes. I expect probably the money goes toward VCU because they're one of those low ATS teams that's been a good angle in the past, and because people are going to find out about that Francis injury news.
All right, so another game on Tuesday I kind of had my eye on here, and in fact, I'm sort of kicking myself for mentioning this game. We probably could have spent time on other better games, but Buffalo is on the road at Akron here. And as I look at Bart Torvik's look-ahead number for this game, Akron -15.6. Has Buffalo really fallen off that far in the MAC here?
Yeah, they won't be -15. I mean, that's too big of a number. But Buffalo, man, it's hard to believe how far they have fallen. If they're anything like that, I'd have to take Buffalo in this game. But Buffalo, obviously, they really miss Nate Oates. This is a team that has enough talent that they should not be 13-7, and they shouldn't have lost 3 games in the MAC. And even, a couple of their other wins were pretty close wins. Buffalo just lost a home game to Kent State, where Kent State was able to control the tempo, slowed them down to 70 possessions, which, Buffalo is third fastest team in the country, I believe, when it comes to overall tempo. So actually they're number 6, but they're number 1 in average possession length in the country. So they really play quickly, but Kent State was able to slow them down a little bit. Akron has been pretty good on offense this year. I'm surprised Akron is averaging 1.183 points per possession in the MAC so far this year. I think that's likely to regress at least somewhat. I think Buffalo is a little bit better than the numbers would indicate, and I would lean toward Buffalo plus the number here if it's 14 or 15.
All right, so let's take a look at Wednesday here. A couple of games I had on my list, one game that you have on your list, and try to go through these quickly here. Loyola Chicago and Southern Illinois in the Missouri Valley Conference is a fascinating game to me. Southern Illinois just knocked off Northern Iowa at home last week. Now they get a crack at the Ramblers coming to town, who just lost to Northern Iowa over the weekend in overtime. So maybe a little bit of a hangover. Southern Illinois has been very, very good at home this season. Interesting little game in the Mo Valley here.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating game. I think that, Loyola Chicago coming off an overtime game makes this an even tougher spot. Like you said, Southern Illinois has been a lot different team at home than they have been on the road. And in general, the Missouri Valley Conference, very good home court advantages here. So I think Southern Illinois' defense, at the very least, should keep them in this game. They're going to slow the game down as much as they can. They're using over 20 seconds of the shot clock on average, which is very slow. They're one of the slowest teams in the country. Loyola, not a team that really plays too fast, but they're faster than Southern Illinois. Loyola Chicago on the road here already did drop a game at Drake, a team that's a decent team, but not a great team this year, not as good as they were last year. And then they lost a game in overtime at Northern Iowa. I think it could be a little bit hard for them to be up for this game right away after losing that overtime game to Northern Iowa, a game which they had to be really, they had to have circled the schedule for that Northern Iowa game, because Northern Iowa is a team that, most people thought would be the top team in the conference, or at least one of the top teams in the conference. Southern Illinois, that's not the case with them. So, if you like Southern Illinois in this game, which I would lean towards Southern Illinois here, you also might want to consider the first half, because it could be hard for Loyola Chicago to be ready right from the start.
All right, so we take a look at the game that you mentioned here for Wednesday, St. Louis and LaSalle, as we roll back to the A10. What stands out here about this one?
Yeah, I kind of like St. Louis in this game. I think that LaSalle was a team that we've talked about here in the past as a team that I thought was overvalued, and I think that continues to be the case. I think St. Louis has been so consistent on defense. I really like what they've done. Travis Ford, not a very good offensive coach, but a guy who gets his team to play hard on defense, and they force a lot of turnovers. 21% of opponents' possessions in a turnover. You look at what LaSalle does on offense. LaSalle on offense, 24.1% of their possessions have ended in a turnover in the A10. Very weak when it comes to ball handling. I think this is a bad matchup here for LaSalle. St. Louis, a team that, if they're laying 2.5, 3 points, 3.5, this is one where I like St. Louis.
I like St. Louis here too. And, again, you look at that very close loss to Dayton where you could make a strong case that they should have won that game.
Yeah.
Then the hangover after that, the long trip down to Davidson, North Carolina. Then they take out some frustration on Fordham, hold the Rams to 39 points. It's almost like that game sort of represented a clean slate for them. They only scored 55 points, which isn't great, but they played extremely well defensively after a couple of bad defensive games. Almost seems like that game, even though Fordham was outclassed and overmatched, almost feels like that was a refocus, get-right game for St. Louis going into this one here against LaSalle.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, this LaSalle team has lots of concerns, the most of which is taking care of the basketball, and that's St. Louis can take advantage of that. And I wouldn't count the St. Louis 55 points against Fordham against them too much. All the Fordham games are like that. They play all these really low scoring games. They're a team that I like to look for unders with whenever I can. This is a St. Louis team where they have a lot more talent than does LaSalle to start with. And while neither team is really very good on offense, St. Louis is consistently good on defense, and LaSalle has been pretty inconsistent.
All right, so one more game on Wednesday here, and I thought I was going to make a bold call on the show, and I even told you I was going to make a bold call, but now I'm going to put my tail between my legs here because I didn't realize just how bad New Mexico has been defensively in their last 4 games, but I still would not be totally shocked if New Mexico knocks off San Diego State on Wednesday.
Yeah, New Mexico has had some issues here this year with injuries, suspensions, things of that sort. I believe Vance Jackson's going to be out for this game. He's missed the last 3 games, so that certainly hurts them a lot. Obviously Carlton Bragg, the situation with him. Jaquan Lyle has missed the last 2 games. I would definitely want to know who's playing in this game if I were betting on New Mexico. I think that them plus the points makes some sense to me. I think they'll be plus quite a few points, especially if those guys are injured. At the same time, I do have to admit, you look at their recent form, and I'm pretty scared about this one, Adam. I have to say, 105-72 loss to Colorado State, 99-78 loss to UNLV, 96-74 loss against Nevada. Defense has not been their strong card here of late. And I think that San Diego State could be knocked off here at some point. And I think if New Mexico were playing at full strength, it could definitely be this game. Without them at full strength and with this many injuries, a bit nervous about this one.
Yeah, that's the big thing. I mean, you got to be at full strength if you're playing against a team like San Diego State. And also, two of the last 4 games for New Mexico, 19 for 28 from 3 for Colorado State, 17 of 35 from 3 for Nevada. So they've got to figure some things out on the perimeter and defend a whole hell of a lot better than they are. We move ahead to Thursday here. We're going to finish with a couple of games in the Colonial Athletic Association. Little CAA stuff here. My favorite situational spot of the week coming up on Saturday. But you wanted to talk UNC Wilmington and Towson on Thursday.
Yeah, UNC Wilmington, I think I mentioned them last week briefly because they've played really hard for their new coach. CB McGrath was clearly not liked very well. Pretty shocking here that they almost beat Hofstra at home. Hofstra, a good quality team. They beat Northeastern at home in overtime. And then they went to Charleston and won on the road. I think Charleston has the most talent of any team in this conference. Northeastern probably the second most talent. So they just beat the top 2 teams in terms of talent. Here they go to play at Towson, and Towson already beat them at home. Towson has to be feeling pretty good about themselves. They've won 6 games in a row coming into this one. They've won the last 2 on the road. Now they come home to play UNC Wilmington. You could say, well, they have beaten a couple top teams here in the last couple games, so maybe Towson won't overlook them as much as what they would have, but at the same time, Towson's going to be laying a big number here. So I lean toward taking the points here with UNC Wilmington. I mean, they look like a team that actually cares now, and as long as they try to the finish, this is a Towson team that, like I said, they have just won 6 games in a row. They won 2 games on the road here, and then also look at the next game they play. They play Charleston on Saturday. So 2 days after this one, they play Charleston. Like I said, I think Charleston probably is the best team in this conference, or at least the most talented team in this conference. So they have to be looking ahead to that game at least a little bit.
Yeah, and as I take a look here, again, it's one of those leagues where there are a lot of really good teams. If you think Charleston's the best, some people think William and Mary might be the best. Some people think Northeastern is the best. They're certainly a very efficient offense. Looking ahead to Saturday here, Hofstra takes on William and Mary. This game is sandwiched for Bill and Mary between Northeastern and College of Charleston. So it's a little bit of a flat spot for them. And they beat Hofstra on the road by 27 points back on January 2nd. So I think Hofstra's in a great spot here. Not exactly sure what this line's going to come out as, but I really do like Hofstra in this situation with the road revenge factor here and with a big-time sandwich spot for William and Mary.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough spot, no doubt about that. Hofstra has been a little bit worse than they were last year. They lost a lot of talent from last year, but still a well-coached team that's very capable of pulling that upset.
Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper over at huntersportspicks.com. What's going on over there right now, man?
They've got a lot of stuff going up as far as discounted prices, all hoop season price, discounted NBA season pass price, discounted here today. So you can go over to huntersportspicks.com and check that out. I will also be sending more of the free picks to the newsletter subscribers there at huntersportspicks.com. Bit of a busy time right now, as we mentioned, but there'll be more of that coming up. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Kyle Hunter Picks. I'll be doing some free plays there on Twitter as well.
Kyle, always great to chat with you, man. Best of luck to you with that operation this week. Again, a reminder to our listeners, not on the air with Kyle next Monday. We're going to skip over that show there the day after the Super Bowl. We'll be back the week after that. But again, man, best wishes. Hope everything goes well with the surgery and hope your recovery goes smoothly as well.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.